Welcome to History That Matters. In July of 1718, a former privateer named Woodes Rogers sailed into Nassau with a promise in one hand and a threat behind it. The promise was a royal pardon. Any pirate who surrendered could walk away from years of robbery, hostage-taking and violence with a clean slate. The threat was simpler: refuse, and the empire would treat you as what it now needed you to be, a criminal. But Nassau was not just a pirate hideout. For years, this island had become something more dangerous, a weak place in the map of empire, where privateers, unemployed sailors, escaped workers, smugglers, and violent men built their own rules because nobody else could enforce theirs. On some pirate ships, captains could be voted out. Loot was divided by written articles. A wounded sailor could be owed compensation for a lost limb. A quartermaster could check the captain's power outside battle. It sounds almost democratic. And inside the crew, sometimes it was, but that freedom had a border. Outside the ship, it was paid for with stolen cargo, terrified prisoners, burned vessels, and trade routes already tied to slavery and empire. The Pirate Republic was not a utopia, it was a system. And like most systems, it survived only while the incentives around it allowed it to survive. This is the story of how empires helped create the Pirates of Nassau, why those pirates built rules of their own, and how Britain destroyed the outlaw republic once it became too expensive to ignore. To understand Nassau, start before the pirates. Start with legal robbery. European empires did not simply fight neat wars between armies, they also outsourced violence. A privateer was a private ship captain given legal permission, through a commission or letter of marque, to attack enemy ships. To the state, this was useful. A government could damage an enemy's trade without building every ship itself. To the privateer, it was a business model: capture a ship, sell its cargo, share the proceeds, and call it service to the crown. The line between privateering and piracy was always thinner than empires liked to admit. During war, the same act could be patriotic. After peace, it could be hanging matter. The Caribbean made that line especially profitable. Spanish colonies moved silver, gold, sugar, tobacco, and other valuable goods through Atlantic routes. French, English, and Dutch rivals wanted access to that wealth. Privateers and buccaneers learned where ships moved, where settlements were weak, and how to turn distance from Europe into opportunity. By the late 17th century, ports like Tortuga and Port Royal had already shown what could happen when raiders, merchants, local officials, and imperial rivalry overlapped. Piracy did not appear from nowhere. It grew in the gaps between official violence and unofficial profit. Then came the War of the Spanish Succession. From 1701 to 1714, European powers fought over who would inherit Spain and its empire. At sea, that meant more privateering, more armed ships, and more men trained to live by plunder under legal cover. Then the war ended. A war economy does not disappear cleanly. Ships remain, cannons remain. Men who have spent years learning how to chase, board, threaten, and seize other vessels remain. But the contracts stop. The legal targets disappear. The sailors are not suddenly rich. The privateers are not suddenly domesticated. The habits of violence do not vanish because diplomats have signed paper in Europe. For some, the next step was simple. Keep doing what they knew. Stop asking permission. That is one reason Nassau mattered. Nassau sat on New Providence in the Bahamas, close to busy routes between the Caribbean and North America. It had a harbour useful to small, fast vessels. It was far enough from strong authority to be tempting, but close enough to trade to be profitable. It was also weak. The Bahamas had been neglected, attacked, abandoned, rebuilt, attacked again, and poorly governed. Contemporary summaries describe lawlessness, rebellion, poor social conditions, ruined defences, and local officials willing to tolerate pirates for a share of their booty. That last detail matters. Pirate havens did not survive by hiding from everyone. They survived because enough people around them found piracy useful. A stolen cargo still needed buyers. A pirate crew still needed food, repairs, drink, ammunition, information, and safe anchorage. Local merchants and officials could condemn piracy in public while profiting from it in private. This is how a criminal system becomes stable. Not because everyone loves it, because too many people benefit from pretending not to see it. Nassau became one of those places. After the War of the Spanish Succession, out-of-work privateers and sailors gathered there. Some had fought under flags, some had served on merchant ships, some were escaping poverty, violence, or discipline. Some were simply opportunists. Some were men who had learned that the Atlantic rewarded force and punished hesitation. The popular name for what formed there is the Pirate Republic. That name is powerful, but it needs care. Nassau was not a modern republic, with clean borders, elections, ministries, and laws in the ordinary sense. It was a loose pirate haven, a cluster of ships, crews, captains, smugglers, traders, taverns, and informal power. But the name survives because there was something real underneath it. Pirates did build rules, not because they were saints, because they were criminals who needed cooperation. A pirate ship was a dangerous workplace. It had no normal court to settle disputes. It could not ask the state to enforce contracts. The crew lived in cramped conditions with weapons, alcohol, fear, hunger, and sudden wealth. If the captain could simply steal from the crew, beat them like a merchant captain, or hoard provisions, the whole enterprise could collapse. So pirate crews developed internal governance. On some ships, articles laid out how plunder was divided, how discipline worked, what happened if someone stole from the company, and what compensation was owed for wounds. In the articles associated with Bartholomew Roberts, every man had a vote in affairs of moment. Provisions and liquor were shared unless scarcity forced rationing. A man who lost a limb in service could receive money from the common stock. The captain and quartermaster received larger shares, but not everything. The point was not equality in a modern moral sense. The point was to keep armed men working together. The quartermaster was central. In ordinary naval and merchant service, captains often held enormous authority. Sailors could face brutal discipline, low wages, and harsh labour. Historians of maritime labour describe a world of floggings, hunger, cramped life, and hard work. Pirate crews knew that world. Many had suffered under it, so they limited the captain. The captain was needed in battle. When a ship was being chased or boarded, democracy could get people killed. In combat, one voice had to command. But outside battle, the crew could give major power to a quartermaster chosen by the men. The quartermaster could divide goods, manage disputes, inspect arms, and act as a kind of trustee for the crew. This was not anarchy. It was a criminal operating system. The ship needed violence outward and trust inward. That is the contradiction at the centre of Nassau. Inside the crew, a sailor might have more voice than he did in honest service. Outside the crew, the system produced robbery, intimidation, hostage-taking, and murder. Pirates could be democratic to one another and brutal to everyone else. That is why the romantic version is too simple. It is also why the moralizing version is too simple. The Pirate Republic was not just chaos. It solved real organisational problems, but it solved them for people living by predation. Nassau's most famous figures came out of this world: Benjamin Hornigold, Henry Jennings, Charles Vane, Calico Jack Rackham, Anne Bonny, Mary Read Stady Bonnet, and Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard, all became attached to the legend of the Bahamas and the wider golden age of piracy. Some of these names have been polished into entertainment, but in their own time, they represented a practical threat to trade and imperial control. Blackbeard shows how that threat worked. His career was short, but his image became enormous. The man, usually called Edward Teach or Edward Thatch, appears clearly in records by 1717. He had sailed with Benjamin Hornigold before becoming a captain himself. In late 1717, near Martinique, Blackbeard and his company captured a French slave ship, La Concorde. This matters. The future Queen Anne's Revenge was not born as a fantasy pirate vessel. It was a ship of the Atlantic slave economy. Blackbeard took it, armed it, and renamed it Queen Anne's Revenge. With that larger ship and a growing fleet, he became one of the most feared maritime predators in the region. His reputation was not decoration, it was strategy. Sources describe Blackbeard cultivating a terrifying appearance. Weapons across his body, smoke and fire associated with his beard and hair, an image meant to make resistance feel irrational. A merchant crew facing that image had to calculate quickly. Fight and maybe die. Or surrender, lose the cargo and possibly live. Fear could save Blackbeard ammunition, time and men. That is why calling him a brand is not just a modern joke. It is an interpretation of what terror did operationally. Then came Charleston. In May 1718, Blackbeard blockaded Charleston, South Carolina, for nearly a week. His flotilla seized vessels entering and leaving the harbour. Hostages were taken. Trade was interrupted. A chest of medicines was demanded as ransom. A contemporary account says the attack struck great terror through Carolina. That phrase is worth taking seriously. This was not just theft. It was a demonstration that a pirate fleet could stop a colonial port, seize its people, and force its government to respond. The pirate republic was dangerous because it could scale beyond isolated robbery. It could become a rival power in the spaces empire had failed to govern. But rival powers attract attention. By 1717 and 1718, British authorities had reason to act. Piracy threatened merchant shipping. It interfered with trade. It embarrassed colonial governments. It also threatened the expanding slave trade and plantation economy that Britain increasingly wanted to protect. So the Crown offered a solution that was both merciful and ruthless. The King's Pardon. Pirates who surrendered could be forgiven for past crimes under specified terms if they abandoned piracy. Those who refused could be hunted, tried, and hanged. This was not just kindness, it was strategy. A pardon divides a criminal network. Some men are tired, some are afraid, some have money and want to keep it. Some believe the game is ending. Some hate their captains more than they hate the government. Offer those men a way out, and the outlaw republic begins to split. Then appoint the right man to enforce the split. Woodes Rogers was not an outsider to maritime violence. He had been a privateer during the War of the Spanish Succession. He had led a successful voyage around the world, captured Spanish prizes, returned with fame, and then suffered financially. He knew the world of ships, prizes, risk, and imperial neglect. That made him useful. In 1718, Rogers was appointed governor of the Bahamas. When he arrived at Nassau in July, he carried the royal proclamation of pardon. The pirates knew this was coming. According to a Bahamian archival summary, they had already discovered a document on a captured ship describing the English plan to eradicate piracy. They met and discussed what to do. Most decided to surrender. Some refused. Charles Vane became the symbol of refusal. When Rogers arrived, Vane escaped from Nassau rather than submit. Accounts describe him using a burning vessel as part of his escape, sending it toward the ships in the harbour and fleeing in the confusion. This was dramatic, but it did not save the Republic. The important fact was not that some pirates escaped. The important fact was that many did not. Once Rogers was in Nassau, the political reality changed. Piracy was no longer protected by neglect. The harbour was no longer simply a pirate base. The pardon created ex-pirates, and ex-pirates could become pirate hunters. Benjamin Hornigold, once part of the pirate world, accepted the pardon and later hunted former comrades. This is one of the coldest parts of the story. The Empire did not only defeat pirates from the outside, it recruited their knowledge from the inside. Who knew the channels, crews, habits, anchorages and weaknesses of pirates better than a former pirate? Rogers used that fracture. Some pirates became legal again. Some became targets. Some were captured and hanged. The same Nassau that had sheltered pirates became a place where piracy was punished. Rogers also had to rebuild authority on land. The Bahamas he entered were in poor condition. Descriptions mention filthy streets, ruined fortifications, dilapidated buildings, overgrown roads, and civil disorder. Rogers spent his own money trying to restore the colony. He rebuilt the fort, reformed civil government, and worked to turn Nassau from pirate refuge back into imperial outpost. That work was not smooth. The local population was used to disorder and profit. Rebuilding government is harder than declaring it, but the direction had changed. The pirate republic depended on a missing state. Rogers represented the state returning. The end came unevenly, but it came quickly. Blackbeard was killed in battle at An-arrgh-chy in November 1718, his head displayed from the bow of the attacking vessel. Stede de Bonnet was captured and hanged in Charleston. Charles Vane was eventually captured and hanged in Jamaica. Calico Jack Rackham was captured and hanged in 1720. Anne Bonny and Mary Read entered legend, partly because their final fates were less cleanly recorded, but their story also belongs to the collapse of that world. Across the wider Atlantic, hundreds of pirates were executed during the suppression period. Bodies could be gibbeted as warnings, left visible to passing sailors. The message was simple: the age when pirate risk was worth pirate reward was ending. This is how systems die, not always in one battle. Sometimes they die when incentives reverse. Before Rogers, Nassau offered pirates refuge, buyers, repairs, taverns, distance, and weak authority. After Rogers, it offered a choice: surrender and maybe live, continue and maybe hang. At the same time, naval power expanded. Trade protection improved. Former pirates changed sides. Safe bases became harder to keep. The lure of plunder still existed, but the cost of pursuing it rose. The Pirate Republic did not fail because pirates suddenly became worse sailors. It failed because the environment that made piracy scalable was being closed around them. That is why the story matters beyond pirates. Nassau shows how outlaw systems grow. They do not grow only from evil men deciding to be evil. They grow where legal systems create violence, then abandon the violent, where labour is brutal enough that criminal alternatives become attractive, where local officials can profit from looking away, where geography protects the outlaw more than the law, where trade is valuable, enforcement is weak, and punishment feels distant. Then, once the cost becomes high enough, power returns. It returns with paperwork and pardons. It returns with ships. It returns with informants. It returns with executions. The pirates of Nassau built something real, but it was not the freedom we usually imagine. It was freedom from merchant captains, not freedom from violence. Freedom for the crew, not for the prisoners. Freedom inside the ship, paid for outside it. That is the hard truth hidden under the black flag. Pirates did build rules. They did vote. They did share plunder in ways that could look fair compared with the maritime world around them. But they also lived by taking from others. Their republic was not destroyed because empire was morally pure. Empire had helped create the conditions that made them possible. It was destroyed because the same empire eventually decided that the pirates had become too expensive to tolerate. And when that happened, the outlaw republic discovered the limit of its freedom. It could govern a ship, it could frighten a harbour, it could interrupt trade, but it could not survive the return of the state. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It costs you nothing, but means a lot to the channel.